Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this weekend's second edition of season 12. I've been having an absolutely delightful weekend, celebrating but also reading a completely delightful rom-com, playing Flirty, which is very much about game and I would say the design of life, because there's just so much of fun to be had when you're really paying attention, I think. And this novel has everything to do with that, by local author Shameez Patel, who has written fantasy fiction in the past. But I love getting into the mind of an author when I've enjoyed a book. And we're going to have precisely that opportunity this evening, speaking to Shameez Patel, who lives in Cape Town, South Africa, with her husband, child, and two cats. During the day, she juggles her time between her daughter and working as an engineer. I can see where the game theory is coming into the design of life here, and this makes sense to me. But at night, she escapes to new worlds that always have someone to fall in love with. Let's welcome Shameez to the show, and it's just so wonderful to have the opportunity to chat to you this evening. Welcome to Book Bites.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm really happy to be here.
Walaikum salam. I mean, look, when I read a book that I enjoy, I can already tell that the author has had a great time, a lot of fun putting this book together. So let's get right into it, because I know you have fantasy fiction in the past as well. There's a trilogy, a series of fantasy fiction, and you've come up with this enjoyable novel, Playing Flirty. Talk to us about your writing process. How did it come to be? Where did this all begin for you?
I've always written for as long as I can remember, and I stopped during university. I think it was just too busy. But a twist is that as fun as Playing Flirty is, it was written during a very sad time. It was written during lockdown, where most of us were quite isolated from our friends and family. And I think I created Rose, who was able to have these game nights with her people, just so that I could live vicariously through her, because I just missed my community so much.
That's wonderful. I feel like the arts kept us going through the pandemic in many ways, and the writing that we see coming out of there is, definitely evidence of that. But also, I mean, the ability to bring together something delightful, enjoyable, entertaining, but intimate fiction also does bring out lots to think about. Family dynamics and a range of things that come through in your writing. Talk to us about writing romance after having written sort of your fantasy fiction. And there's elements of that, because obviously you're a Lord of the Rings fan. Now, without giving away too much, it was such a delightful sort of aspect of that, which I don't want to give any spoilers. Obviously, people, you'll have to read this book if you want to know what we're talking about. Talk to us about writing romance and really getting into the skin of these characters.
I had so much fun with it, and Playing Flirty was actually written before the fantasy trilogy, but the fantasy trilogy found a home first. So romance has always been my first love, and writing it felt completely natural to me. It was one of the easiest books I've written so far, and I really think it is because Rose came to me almost fully formed. She knew exactly who she was and who she was going to fall in love with. All I had to do was write their story.
We talk about character development. This is something that came to me now when you're saying that you felt Rose is fully formed. You really do have a feel for your character. And we often talk about, as a successful novelist, this idea that you've set your scene, you've, set your setting, so to speak, and you allow your reader to walk through the process with you, because you can see through the eyes of this creator, this author. What I really appreciate about your style of writing is that you also give an idea of the inner life of your characters. And it's not just Rose. I mean, your characters are not sort of caricatures of who you might be. These are distinct, very well engaged characters. And I actually found myself like having this moment where you can actually see through the eyes of these characters and how they feel. Talk to us about how much depth it takes to get into your character, not just them moving through the world, but that eye movements, that understanding that develops between people. Give us some of a sense of how this came about, because it tells us, I think, quite a bit about you as the individual, not just as the writer.
I think I of course, as the author, I knew all of their relationships up front, and my first draft didn't depict that. It was a case of writing and rewriting and trying to find the gaps where Where it lacked, I also had to reach out to beta readers, who, for anyone that doesn't know, are your early readers that read long before the book has even a publishing deal. And I asked them if they felt that anything was lacking, were there any parts that they needed more. And there were one or two readers that would come back and say they really wished that they knew what Rose was thinking at this point in the book, and so on and so forth. And it really is such a wonderful process to be able to work with readers, and something that you don't know beforehand, before entering the publishing industry, that this is common practice. And you realize that you're so close to the work. I know everything Rose is feeling, and I forget that the reader doesn't. So it really is a case of writing and rewriting until everything is on the page that really needs to be there. In terms of Rose's emotions, she was easy to get into her mind, not always easy to write it all down, because some characters are almost, I want to say, almost private. And that is the exact reason why William doesn't get a point of view in this book, because I don't think any of us need to be in William's mind.
But it also comes across as, like you say, some individuals are just private, introverted perhaps, or mixture of that. And that comes through that sensitivity with which you've drawn your characters in what might seem as, romance is sometimes just seen as like, oh, it's this cute story. But the sensitivity shows the inner life of your characters and how much you want to reveal shows. And I really enjoyed that. I think I really enjoyed that. So well done on that.
Thank you.
Another question I have is life goals, right? She has this vision board or this note thing that she does life goals. Let's talk about life goals and how important it is to have some kind of idea or vision of what you want. Maybe not a timeline exactly, although she does seem to. We always seem like at 23, I'm going to do this. At 25, I'm going to do this. At 27, talk to us about life goals and what this means to you as an individual, but also coming through your character.
I'm I'm very goal driven, not as goal driven as Rose. I don't think any of us should be as goal driven as Rose is. And I really wanted to explore the societal demands that we have, and how we've put timelines on ourselves to reach certain goals, goals that are not restricted to time. I mean, yes, in terms of perhaps having a child with, biologically, it could be a bit difficult if you wait too long. But in terms of anything else, whether it's getting married or finding your dream job or publishing a book, you can do that at any age. And I really wanted to explore how we limit ourselves by putting us in this box and on this one track that we have to stay on. Otherwise, we believe everything is going to be a failure. So it was difficult facing that as well, as somebody who is goal driven. And I think it was very rewarding to explore it.
It's interesting. I mean, life can be very humbling. And as much as we have this wish list, so to speak, and this dream list, and how rigid we can be about it or not, things tend to happen in their time. Call it fate, call it destiny, call it, a matter of things falling together. Let's talk about life and game design, because this in some way comes through so beautifully in your book. Um, I'm not going to get into game theory and all of that because I know you have the mind for that, obviously. But let's talk about the sort of playful way in which you brought game and questions about life together in this enjoyable read.
I can't tell you how exactly that came about, but when I was writing, the metaphor of life being this game that we play, it fell into place. And the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I do enjoy gaming. I enjoy video games. I enjoy board games. And it was really exciting to be able to mesh that and my love for writing and also philosophy and exploring these questions that we have. I think games are designed to hold our interest, and in so, it has to be designed on the way that we make decisions. Even in games, as you know from the book, there are moments where we take risks, where we know what we're doing. There are moments in games when we have to be conniving to win, and you make a choice as to whether or not you feel comfortable with that. There could be backstabbing, and ultimately you have to decide if you're there to win or to enjoy the game.
There are games where, and I know throughout the book they play different board games. Your characters and their friends sort of play different different board games. And I think you're right. I think even in real life, games can tell you a lot about the players. And that comes through when you're developing your characters, because I think through the game you've shown so much about your characters. It's very enjoyable to read that. Here's the big question, though: is life a game?
I think even that is a choice that the gamer slash the person needs to make. I think there are many ways to walk through life, and you could play it like a game. You could take it very seriously. You could take it easy. You could just be here for the ride, or you could be goal driven like Rose. I do think, in a way, we are all here. We're playing, we're figuring things out, and hopefully, we're having a good time.
I sometimes wonder, and I wondered this while reading it as well, that as much as we think that, whether it's the life goals list, or this idea of having some kind of control over life and wanting to make the most out of it, there's a certain amount of unpredictability. How much does unpredictability feature in your writing and in your story?
A lot. In a word, or in 2 words, a lot. With playing Flirty at least, I started with a blank page and an idea. Like I said, Rose came to me quite clearly, as did William and the ultimate love story. But everything in between was something that I sat down and I just wrote. And it was, a lot of it needed to be thrown away because it wasn't very structured. It wasn't the way a story would flow, but I needed to write it to get to know the story better. A lot of unpredictable things happened because I personally, despite living my life by spreadsheet myself, I cannot plan a story. It needs to grow organically, which is what the story did. And I do find that different stories have different needs, and something like a mystery might need a little bit more plotting. But this specific book came to me on its own, in its own form while I was writing it.
I appreciate the thoughtfulness. As much as you say this is organic, I appreciate the thoughtfulness when you say that the first draft eventually had readers and it grew from there, and you added feedback and assimilated that in many ways. So there's design, in the organic as well, and I really see that come through in the final draft. And we have to commend the editors we work with as well. As much as this is entertaining, delightful, it certainly was, and I enjoyed getting to know your characters. One of the questions I have is, there's plenty of social commentary in your book as well. And one of the things that come to the fore is both family dynamics, father and son relationships, relationship dynamics between people, because at first it's Patrick and it's the life goals and it's the proposal and what will happen next. And so there's almost like this tie that she has. And I think a lot of women, perhaps a lot of men as well, can identify with that. If you've been in a long-term relationship and you feel like it's going somewhere and you feel almost sort of, well, it's commitment, right? You feel a commitment to an end goal, so to speak. Let's talk about family and relationship dynamics and perhaps how we evolve through that, because I think I see that coming through in such beautiful ways through your characters.
Yes, you can. Rose and Patrick were something I feel very, what is the right word? I feel very precious about the two of them because a lot of people hate Patrick, as they should and could. That is their right to do so, but I don't. I I always surprise readers when I say that I don't hate Patrick. I don't think that he's a bad person. And my intention with their story was really to highlight a relationship that just fails for no reason, no big reason. Oftentimes in literature, relationships end because somebody's cheated or is very abusive, or they've gone long distance or something very big and drastic. But sometimes relationships just end. Sometimes it's a slow, simmering death of a relationship, and you're stuck there wondering if you have enough reason to leave. And I think that is a very difficult choice for a lot of people in a long-term relationship because, as you mentioned, it's time and commitment, and in a way, it's almost investment at a certain point. If you're looking at your age, you could easily think, I've given this person 10 years of my life, do I really want to start over? And for somebody as goal driven as Rose, who is tracking down time and seeing whether she's going to make these goals, I think something like that was always going to be a very difficult thing for her to face.
I think a lot of people can identify with that. I mean, hate is a strong word, but we all know somebody like Patrick who's goal driven, who's just setting up life for himself, is also goal driven. And I think that's what brings them together. That's what makes them understand each other. That drift, that movement in their relationship, the sort of up and down, so many can identify with. And that's what makes it so real. And so, yeah, there's that difficulty of letting go. So I know that people will find lots of identification here. And you speak with such empathy about your character, Patrick, even though people might say, oh, it's obvious this shouldn't work, or perhaps it's not so obvious after all, you know? Comes down to those choices you talk about. Another serious, another sort of serious matter that comes up sort of in the background is workplace harassment. I think that was an important thread because it's difficult to really you start to think, am I imagining? But the discomfort that the person feels from the perpetrator, that sort of latent power that somebody has over you when you're in a workplace, a senior. Let's talk a little bit about that. It's quite an important, even though a background thread. And then you talk about it to people that you feel safe with, and you still get a sort of, maybe you're imagining things or just look over it. The gaslighting happens. Please take a few minutes and talk to us about really the importance of workplace harassment and how we second guess ourselves.
I think romance is such a safe space, and it is a really wonderful place to explore hard topics. And a
Mhm.
lot of people outside of the romance genre who has never read romance or given it much time always think that it's always fluffy, it's always sort of superficial. But I think romance allows a lot of readers to explore a lot of different and heavy themes while knowing that ultimately the main character is going to be okay. And so it gave me that option to explore a few topics. And workplace harassment was something I decided to look into because it is common, very common. It's also mostly targeted at women. I'm not saying that men have never been harassed at work, but it certainly is part of gender based violence. And I think Rose, again, being somebody that is so goal driven, would almost consider putting up with a certain level of harassment if it allows her goals to continue. Because once again, just like with Patrick, just like making that decision to think of losing your position and losing all these years that you've invested into a company, and to rather wonder, but can I just handle this my own way? Everything will be fine and I'll get the job that I need and it'll just go away. And you mentioned being gaslit, which is also a common experience because we as women tend to doubt ourselves quite easily, I've found. And I think that it's a very natural thought process. And it's a very difficult one as well, because other than the right answer being don't harass women, I don't think there's a right way for a woman to deal with being harassed. I think there's a lot of nuance to the way that a woman reacts to being harassed and how her fear or her experiences and her situation might affect that. The people around her might not believe her. She might have other reasons to put up with it. It's very difficult, and I do think that it is a unique experience for anyone. And I wanted to explore just one of the millions of experiences out there.
One definitely gets a sense, through this experience, this particular experience that she's goal driven. And there's almost like this pendulum between the slow discomfort that she's experiencing over time when she interacts with the perpetrator, and the self-doubt, and the how much can I handle, and the hot and the water getting hotter as you wait to see what happens. And there is a crunch point, so it's very important that that thread has followed through, and I think it will leave your readers with this kind of thought as to what happens in the situation. How do you support somebody who brings up the situation, this discomfort, instead of saying, just kind of deal with it, overlook it, or whatever the case might be. Um, and it comes back also to that inner dialogue I spoke about, that your characters have, especially your protagonist. Rose has this emotional inner life that we get a sense of, and I think that was really something I appreciated as a reader, as a content creator. Let's quickly talk about, beyond the characters and the storyline, just the absolute fun of seeing her be successful. I mean, without giving away spoilers, but seeing her being successful in her relationship, even with the sort of tug of wars that she's experiencing and all of that.
That was obviously my favorite bits to write because I know, and the readers get a taste of the type of relationship that she had, and that she was genuinely happy with it for a long time because she didn't realize how much love she could receive and how deeply somebody else could possibly love her and appreciate her. And it was such a rewarding thing to be able to write that and to be able to give that to her. Definitely one of my favorite bits.
It definitely comes through. And again, to say that intimate narrative, as much as we go like, okay, rom-com, easygoing, sort of light reading, but there's such beauty and such, as you say, opportunity to explore so many aspects of intimate life that takes the personal into the political in so many ways. And I think you've done that in many ways while allowing a very enjoyable, entertaining read. Um, I want to give us a few minutes to even talk about. I know that the books are available all over and that you've been running launches around the country, which is great. But I want to also take a few minutes to talk about your fantasy series. If anyone's picking this up for the first time and then going back to your fantasy series, or your readers of the fantasy series are coming to look for this, let's give a sense of what it was. But because I through this I can tell that, like I said, you're a Lord of the Rings fan, and I don't want to get into that because it's a major spoiler that I loved. Let's talk about that, the trilogy that you wrote.
The Celine trilogy is my fantasy trilogy and was published before Playing Flirty, even though I'd written it after. It will always be my book baby in that way. It was the book that launched me into feeling like an author, into having readers have access to my work and, well, properly at least, and getting that not feedback necessarily from readers, but also having that two-way communication with certain readers, where instead of the story just living in your head, it now lives in other people's heads and hearts, hopefully. And readers, I do find that there are a lot of readers that go for both the romance and the fantasy trilogy, because I will say that the fantasy trilogy has a very, very big romantic subplot. So for the lovers of romance, it tends to keep you fed in that way. Um, I personally feel that as the same person that would read both those novels, obviously biased as I've written them, that most readers would feel comfortable going between the two genres. I believe that my writing voice is quite similar in both, except set in a fantasy world with very different problems.
So there's quite stretch of the imagination when you're writing, I suppose, fantasy fiction in that sense. And I hope that readers will be picking up copies and enjoying these different genres. I know that Playing Flirty will definitely appeal. It's the thing about romance; it's human element story. So we definitely hope that loads of people will be picking up Playing Flirty and getting in touch if they want to add any of their comments in that sense as well. Shameez, thank you so much for your time this evening. It was absolutely fantastic talking to you. What would
Thank you
be
so much.
your advice to anyone who wanted to write either fantasy fiction or romance, and people looking out there to write their stories?
I would encourage people to write. It sounds like very simple, very uh, straightforward advice, but oftentimes it's just the writing that's holding you back, and you're writing, but you're not moving forward because you're writing and you're editing and you're doubting, and you just never get to the end of your first draft. So I would encourage anybody who wants to write to the book's completion. And then you can doubt yourself if you really want to, but get to the end of that first draft.
It's so important that you mentioned about the first draft. I think a lot of people have this misconception that you write that thing and you get it out there and it gets published, and we know how many times you have to revise. And as you said, you consulted with people you could trust and beta readers to be able to add layers, and the layers show in your final product. So this is wonderful advice. Thank you so much. We wish you every
Thank
success,
you.
continued success with this book and future writing, and
Oh, wow.
all the best.
Shukran so much. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. And so you heard it from author Shameez Patel right now about Playing Flirty, her latest novel. Absolutely beautiful writing. Please do get a copy. And I want to add to the advice about writing, because if you want to write our stories, your stories, read our local literature, read as widely as you can, because it's really the reading that allows you to really have an appreciation for character development, for story, and for being able to process some of your own. That's it from us this weekend on Book Bites. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.